You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Well, hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to another episode of Gingerarchy. I am your host, Tricia Stewart Mann. I have hyphenated my last name because I'm a radical feminist. Not really. Today I have an awesome guest that I call friend as well. This is Michael Maharrey. Some of you probably know him from Liberty Circle. Some of you may not. The We Are Libertarians podcast network, which I'm lucky enough to be a part of, has several people that are new to liberty, maybe some conservatives, maybe some liberals, people that aren't really politically that interested and are just kind of Googling libertarianism and come across it. So Mike is a anarcho-Christian or a Christian anarchist. Did I say that right? Am I explaining it, or do you like to call yourself something different?
I don't know. There's really not any good words for what I am.
Well, let's make one up right now.
I don't know. I like the term voluntarist because I think that's really the most descriptive of my philosophy. The idea that all association should be voluntary. We shouldn't use violence, force, and coercion in our relationships with other human beings. But when you say voluntarist, everybody's just like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Or they think you like to go to the food bank a lot.
Right. Yeah. When you say anarchist, people think that you're going to burn garbage cans and throw bricks through windows. So I don't do that. So I don't know. But,
don't lie. When you say, that everything should be done consensually, without violent coercion, kind of sounds a lot like somebody that walked the earth 2,000 years ago. So. Yeah,
it does. Right.
So just a quick bio on you. You do a lot of things besides your podcast, which is called Godarchy. Which I believe is probably only a few years old now, 2, 3.
Yeah, I think I've been doing the podcast for 2 years. I actually created the website, I think in 2016. So Godarchy has existed for a while, but it started out more just as me writing. And then I started the podcast a couple of years ago.
Which, by the way, it's one of my favorite podcasts. In fact, I think it's on the list at libertarianpodcast.com. I know that we host it and kind of put up what's up there. So those are some of our favorite libertarian podcasts and some of the most popular. So if you guys are interested in Christian anarchy, go to Godarchy podcast. Is it Godarchy or Godarchy podcast?
It's godarchy.org is where you can find all things Godarchy.
You were lucky to get in early and get that title.
Yep.
You also work for the 10th Amendment Center. You are the communications director there. And then are you still an editor at Shift Gold?
I am indeed.
Okay. And you do a podcast there as well, right?
I do. It's called the Friday Gold Wrap. Which is every Friday. It's kind of a 15 to 20 minute, sum up of the week in gold and economic news. And then I'm actually getting ready to start a new, kind of revamp an old show for Shift Gold, which is going to be more interview oriented. So a couple times a month, interviewing folks, talking about gold, silver, investing, economics, those type of things.
My husband is a big fanboy of Peter Schiff. And all things precious metals. So I'll have to turn him on to that. He actually helped bring him over to libertarianism.
Oh, cool.
So that's pretty cool. And then you have several ebooks. I know that the most recent book you authored was Constitution Owner's Manual, because you're a mini statist. No, not really.
Yes, I think
you use tools in your toolbox, right? And so
exactly.
One of those tools. Yeah. So you guys can get a copy of that. Probably go to michaelmaharrey.com, right?
That's correct.
And we'll put that in the show notes and we'll ask you again at the end.
Cool.
But today we're talking about Godarchy and your journey to libertarian anarchism. So were you born an anarchist? Were you born a Christian?
I think all people are born anarchists, right? Like little kids are anarchists. But no, I was in my, high school, really through most of my adult years, I was what you would probably call a neoconservative. I was very much aligned with the religious right. So, big Rush Limbaugh fan, real active real active in like pro-life type of things. So, you're pretty standard religious right Republican, up until really I was in my, I guess probably my early 40s is when my political viewpoint started to evolve. I always intuitively believed in limited government. Now, we now know that limited government's not really a thing, but as an ideal, that's cool, right? And that's what Republicans were supposed to stand for. So I was all into that. But when Obama was elected, I kind of got caught up in the whole Tea Party movement, like a lot of people did, and started to realize at that point that, maybe the Republicans aren't quite as limited government as they make themselves out to be. And when I got involved with the 10th Amendment Center, which was kind of my gateway drug into liberty, which is why I still do Constitution stuff today, I really started to realize that Republicans and Democrats are pretty much the same side of the two different sides of the exact same coin, and that the Republicans were no more limited government than the Democrats were. And that kind of started my slide into libertarianism and eventually full-blown anti-statism. And a lot of that had to do, again, with the 10th Amendment Center and folks that I was exposed to through some live events we did in the early days of the 10th Amendment Center, particularly Tom Woods, very influential in terms of opening my eyes to things like Austrian economics and anarcho-capitalism, as the term is often thrown about. So, yeah, it was kind of a slow grind over 5 or 6 years, but here I am today, and a full blown, let's just do away with the whole state.
Yeah. So you're, the old joke, how long does it take for minarchist? And
it's supposed to be 6 months. Yeah. The hang up for me was foreign policy. I shifted really fast in terms of, economics and those types of things. Early in that journey, I read Atlas Shrugged, and Atlas Shrugged is a great kind of gateway book as far as, making you realize just how horrible the state is in terms of economics and destroying the free market. But, I grew up in that, in a very military oriented home. My grandfather was career military, and it was just really hard for me to let go that we've got to bomb brown people in faraway lands in order to be free. That was a tough one for me. And, again, it was a speech that Tom did, Tom Woods, that kind of broke that. And it was really a simple thing that he said. And, looking back, it's like, duh. But he made the point that the same horrible people that are running the domestic policy that I already hated are running the foreign policy too. And it was like, oh,
if they're bad at this, chances are.
Yeah. And then around that same time, I was really kind of at a point in life where I was trying to reconcile my spiritual life and my spiritual identity with my political identity. I was like a lot of folks. I think this is kind of typical American thinking, compartmentalize everything. So you've got your work, and you've got your philosophy on politics, and you've got your religion, and all of these things exist in kind of different spheres and don't necessarily overlap. And I realized that, I need to have a coherent outlook, a view on life, a coherent philosophy. And I didn't really have one. And so I was starting to try to reconcile my spiritual faith along with my political ideology. And, it doesn't take a real long time when you really start getting to the bare bones of Christianity and what Jesus taught, that maybe making war all over the world is not what Jesus would have us to do. And, maybe we shouldn't be celebrating killing people. And so as I began, and it is, we kind of laugh. It's funny, but it's amazing how entrenched really bad thinking can get in our heads just because we accept so many things that we're taught, indoctrinated with all of our lives. And we have this idea that, America is great and holy, and it's the country of God. And so whatever we do is noble. And we fail to see the fact that, these drone strikes are killing innocent people. And even if they're not innocent in terms of the eyes of the state, I mean, what have they ever done to us? Mm-hmm. And so that was a real big shifting point for me. And I've gone from probably one of the biggest warmongers you can imagine, a guy who actually sat in 1991 and made it an intentional part of my day to watch Gulf War I on television because I thought all the bombers and stuff was so cool, to being anti-war probably being the central policy thing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I can relate so much with that. I think you touched on something funny. You said your one hang up. And whenever I talk to anarchists or people that even just became like, minarchist libertarians, they did always have one thing that they were hung up on. And I think it's because we take politics more as a religion than politics, which it is. So. I mean, statism anyways, that is. So it's hard to let go because you feel connected to it. It's kind of part of who you are.
Yeah, it's dogma.
Yeah. Which is funny because, if you have faith, that should probably be the whole of who you are and everything else should stem from that.
Exactly.
But like you said, we compartmentalize. Now, when you started Godarchy, you transitioned kind of over to voluntarists. Did you get pushback from like fellow Christians or anybody that maybe had, you had worked with before in the field of liberty or anything like that? Or are they saying, who knows what kind of emails you get?
Yeah, not really. I mean, there is a certain segment in our circles that are the hardcore atheists. So I got a little bit in the early days of the Sky Daddy, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't engage that because in terms of people's faith and their view on religion and who God is, I learned a long time ago, I'm not going to argue anybody into faith. I'm not going to argue anybody into believing in God. That's not my job. And so if a person is really dead set in, a philosophy of atheism or whatever, that's where they are. And I'm not going to try to argue them out of it. Now, if they want to come and ask legitimate questions, if they're seeking, I'm more than happy to talk to folks. But, I view Christianity as a relationship with God. And I can sit here and tell you how wonderful my wife is and how great she is and what an incredible person is. You're not going to really understand that until you meet her, until you want to meet her. You might think, oh, well, I've heard about her. She's awful. Well, I'm not going to talk you out of it. You have to meet her and get to know her. I think the same thing is true with God. So I'm not into arguing religion. So I really will try to diffuse that really fast and like, hey, first off, don't be condescending. I have a very, intellectual place that I can come from, and we can talk about that if you want to. But on the other hand, I'm not going to look down upon you or think less of you because you have a different belief system than I do. I just don't have time for that in my life. There's plenty of people who really want answers to questions, and I'm not going to argue with somebody who doesn't.
Yes. And generally, I sometimes have gotten kickback for, my faith, beliefs, or pretty much anything,
right.
Because I decided that I'm an anarchist. So, there's like 4 of us in the world. Right. But I found that it is actually a small percentage of people that just argue with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so it's probably not worth my time. Yeah. So what is your goal then with Godarchy podcast?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that there is a goal.
You can say that and be honest.
Yeah. I mean, So I can tell you why I started Godarchy. The kind of impetus was I really wanted to just inject a Christian voice into the world that was anti-war. That was really the if you look at a lot of the early articles, there's a lot of anti-war stuff, and that was really I came out of this evangelical world. Where so many people are cheerleaders for the military and for the warfare and for all of those things. And so I wanted there to be some kind of Christian voice that counters that says, look, maybe we need to step back and look at some of the things Jesus taught, like loving our enemies and not repaying evil with evil and those types of things. And since then, I guess it's kind of evolved. It's really just kind of a place for me to work out my faith and my political philosophy and talk about it with folks and try to engage other people and really just to make people think. I've had a lot of different guests. I've had atheists. I've had a Muslim. I really want to just get discussions out there, bring people together, get people to really think about things. And I guess as a broader view in terms of how Godarchy faces the world at large, I kind of want to hold up a mirror to society and to your average person out there and make them own their own violence. We know that all government is predicated on violence, force, and coercion. Every single law that exists is ultimately backed up by some guy with a gun. And you can take that all the way to something as simple as a seatbelt law. If you resist that law long enough, you will get shot. There was a police shooting not too long ago. The whole thing started because somebody had something improper hanging on their rearview mirror. So we know that politics is violence, force, and coercion. And there's so many people out there on both sides of the political spectrum, or on all sides. They think that they're holy and noble because of their political views. People on the left, we care about people and we're going to give you health care. And, people on the right, we care about unborn babies. Well, if you're using politics to bring your worldview into existence, then you're using violence, and you cannot stand on a moral high ground when you are predicating your worldview on violence, force, and coercion. So that's I guess to answer your question, that's kind of what Godarchy is doing. It's holding up a mirror to the world and saying, own your violence, force, and coercion, and maybe that's not the best way to organize a society, especially if you're a Christian.
I love how you say that, because honestly, it really just boils down to that. You can make every excuse under the world. Well, what if they come and get us? And obviously, self-defense is not, violence.
Right.
But, what if this, and if this person does this, and do you want a world like this? And they're all what ifs, but it doesn't matter, because even if the worst thing happens, your answer shouldn't be violence.
Right. I'm going to
coercion.
hit you.
Yeah.
And I think you hit on a key thing. There is defensive violence. And I think as far as the libertarian philosophy goes, defensive violence is certainly ethically allowable. Right. You can repel force. You can resist people who are aggressing against you. Now, as a Christian, I have some struggles with even how far defensive force can go. But in terms of politics, we know that defensive violence is permissible from an ethical standpoint. So that's really how you should look at things that the government does. Because, even in a stateless society, we're going to still have some form of governance. So what type of violence is allowed? Well, the type of violence that is defensive. So when you look at like the criminal system, I don't have a problem with punishing somebody who has stolen your property or who has aggressed against somebody physically, the murder, rape, those types of things. Violence is appropriate in that case because it is defensive. You are defending yourself from somebody else's aggression. But when you get to things like seatbelt laws, drug laws, prostitution laws, the vast majority of the laws are out there, up to and including the way government funds itself. You don't have any justification for shooting somebody for that. I can't justify going into your house and saying, Tricia, my mom has cancer, so I need some money for her health care. So I'm going to rob you. And if you don't give me some money, I'm going to shoot you. Nobody can do that. Well, this is what the government does every day. And we justify it by saying, well, we're doing good things like building roads.
Which brings me to another question. You have so much good meat in there. I appreciate what you said, but there's something that I call the libertarian Christians roads. And that's, when people talk about a certain verse that I'm sure you're fully aware of.
I know exactly where we're going.
It's Romans 13.
Yes.
That's my roads when Christian libertarians.
Yeah, exactly. It's supposed to be this conversation stopper.
Yes.
As soon as you start talking Romans 13, I've never heard that before. Yeah. It's the same thing when you.
What book is that in? Is that the New Testament or the Old Testament?
It's the same thing if you're talking about the Constitution and somebody wants to throw Spooner at me. As if I've been doing this for over 10 years and I've never read anything that Spooner had to say. This is not a shock to me. It's not like I haven't wrestled
with
this
this
before.
Love Spooner, but I bet you if the Constitution worked for him, he would use this.
Well, and in fact, in his early days, Spooner did actually use the Constitution. But that's getting kind of off the track. But the same thing is true of Romans 13. This is not a shocking thing to me. I've heard this verse. You're not stumping me with Romans 13.
Okay, so I'm going to play I want to say devil's advocate, but that feels weird in this conversation.
Yes.
But I guess maybe not. Anyways, that's a long. So what if I was to say to you, well, if he says, follow the government, then why would we not do it? What would be your answer to somebody?
Well, I start off by, I think that the whole context of Romans 13, the content of Romans 13 is much more complicated than I think a lot of people, including some Christian anarchists, want to make it. I'm not comfortable just writing off those verses like they don't exist. And some people will do that. So I like to start by casting doubt on the kind of traditional statist viewpoint of it, that somehow it means that we're supposed to do whatever the government tells us. That is clearly not the case if you read any other passage in the Bible. I can point out countless Bible stories, Bible events, historical events where people who were considered to be of God resisted the government. We can start with Moses, his mother putting him in a basket. We can go to Peter talking about, we're to follow God and not man. So there's all kinds of examples of this. It clearly does not mean that we do whatever the government tells us. And then I can take it to the modern example. Does that mean that the German guard who marched the Jews into the showers, that they were somehow morally justified because of Romans 13? That's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. So it must mean something else besides what the statists are trying to tell us that it means. And then we can get into it and really dig into it and say, okay, well, what is this telling us? And that gets a little bit more complicated, I think. For me, I kind of look at it as Roman. I think Rosa Parks is a perfect example of Romans 13 in action. The law told her that she was supposed to do something that was unjust. She was supposed to go to the back of the bus, and she simply refused to go to the back of the bus. Now, she didn't tear the bus up. She didn't punch the cop in the mouth. She didn't resist. She accepted the consequences of her refusal to go along with this injustice. But she didn't just bow to something that was unjust and wrong. And I think that's kind of what Romans 13 gets to. We are obviously to follow the laws of God, and sometimes there's going to be consequences to that when they come in conflict with the laws of the world. And at that point, we don't resist. We don't fight back. We don't pick up a gun and start a rebellion. We approach it in the same way that the early church did with the Romans. And they didn't do all the Roman stuff. They didn't go worship in the pagan temples, and they were supposed to. I mean, this wasn't just a matter of religion for the Romans. It was part of their civic duty to do Roman religion, and they refused to do it. And that's why we have all of these Christian martyrs in the early days of the church, because they refused to follow the edicts of the government. And yet they were also very emphatic in the fact that we are not going to create a rebellion. We're not going to try to overthrow the emperor. We're not going to, start a Christian war. We're going to submit, insofar as we will accept the consequences for not doing what you tell us. So that's kind of where I think Romans 13 is getting to. But, we can go even farther into that, and I don't want to, because then we're getting into some pretty...
I like it. Sorry, it's great, because I'm sure, I think you did do a show on it, a couple.
Yeah, actually I have. Yeah. But I think interesting for people who really want to kind of think through this more deeply, read Romans 13 and then go read Revelation 13, because those two chapters have very divergent views of what government is and what government does. And one of my favorite theologians, William Stringfellow, actually has a whole book where he juxtaposes those two things and kind of looks at the tension between those two chapters in the Bible. And that really kind of helps you understand as well that, again, Romans 13 is not this simplistic statist platitude that, oh, well, you're supposed to do what the government says.
Yes. Or we could also look, at everything that said, like, we'd all be plucking our eyes out and cutting off our hands.
Right.
If we took it literally, which, wouldn't always be the worst thing. But
I'd have no hands or eyes.
So like, keeping on that a little bit, as far as your fellow Christians go, what do they think of you being an anarchist?
I think most of them think I'm nuts.
Like, you kind of are.
Yeah, maybe. That's the thing that's the struggle for us, right? We have embraced a philosophy that is very beautiful and coherent when you understand it, but it's not simple. you really have to start with some things to understand where we're coming from. You have to start with the idea of self-ownership, and you have to start with the ideas of non-aggression. And you can't put our political and spiritual philosophy in a tweet. And we live in a world where people want it in a tweet. However many characters a tweet is, I don't even know. But that's very difficult to do. Yeah, I'm not either. I'm horrible at Twitter. Obviously, I use a lot of words. But so that's the struggle. And so, when you are initially engaging with somebody and you say, oh, yeah, I'm a voluntarist or I'm an anarchist, they have all of these preconceived notions. They're not going to self-ownership and non-aggression. They're going to, dudes setting garbage cans on fire or breaking windows, or they immediately go to all those questions. Well, what about the roads, or Romans 13? It's very difficult. You have to develop relationships with people for them to begin to understand where you're coming from, I think. So I think from the outside, I think a lot of people my impression of what people in my church think of me, that Mike Maharrey, he's a pretty cool guy. He's a good Christian. He's got some weird politics though. I don't know, Yeah. But then as you engage with people, then they start to understand it. Like my pastor, I've now known him for about a year and a half. We came to this church when we moved down here about a year and a half ago. And I think he's starting to get it. He hasn't embraced it, but at least he gets where I'm coming from. Yeah. And he knows that it's not some kind of crazy thing, because we've been able to talk about some of these first principles like self-ownership and, the idea that God is not forcing his will upon us. So therefore we don't have the right or authority to force our will upon other people. But this is a thing that frustrates. I feel like sometimes I was born in the wrong century. Because I love reading Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and these letters that they wrote back and forth to each other. Those folks in those times, they were very deep thinkers. They spent a lot of time reading and writing. We spend a lot of time watching television and doing sports ball. I wore my sports ball shirt for you today, by the way.
You know how much I love my sports ball.
I know. Yes. So yeah, it's we live in a hard world, and I think our philosophy tends to attract a lot of people who like to read and like to do philosophy and like to reason, but a lot of people don't like that. And that's a challenge. That's something that I often think about and wish I was better at packaging these ideas into things that your average person can grasp, music and art and those types of things, because that's where our culture is communicated. People aren't going to sit down and read some of these books behind me. The human action is not something your average person is going to pick up and read. So it's a challenge. And that's what I think shows like what you're doing are important, because us having these conversations and other people listening in will give them some ideas and maybe spark some thinking and some curiosity outside of, what they're typically getting in their Facebook feed or Twitter or, perusing YouTube videos.
I think that is the beauty of podcasts, because it's kind of, it's just basically a short speech or, interview with people. That I do think that podcast coming along and kind of replacing maybe talk radio and things like that. It's actually pretty good, because you have so much to pick from, and it really makes you think, and you can do it while you're doing other things. So it's great for, your lay person or somebody that's not into sitting down and cracking open, Rothbard or anything like that.
Right. The other thing that's really cool about podcasting is a lot of times you get in a conversation, like we're having a conversation now. And that's really my interview style, is to just have a conversation. Sometimes you get really deep, it's almost like you forget that you're doing a podcast, and it's like, I'm just having a conversation with this person. And actually my last episode, I did an interview with a guy named Mark West, who
I listened to it. It was, I generally I subscribe, so I try to get all of them, but that was excellent. He just really was great.
He's a cool dude, and he's really exploring and questioning and wrestling with a lot of things. And I think at the end of that podcast, we both kind of were just having this conversation. We both got pretty personal about some of the things that we're struggling with. You don't necessarily get that in a TV interview, because people are kind of on guard and whatnot. So that's one of the things I do love about podcasting, is that you can kind of get an intimacy and an informality that you don't get in other forms of media.
And speaking of podcasts, you reminded me that we're on one. So we're going to take a quick break from our sponsors. But when we come back, I kind of want to get down to something you were talking about in your last episode about American evangelical Christianity. So
cool.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Hello, my lovelies. We are back, and I am talking to Mike Maharrey. Mike Maharrey. You prefer Mike, right?
I go by Mike casually. I write when I write, I usually go by Michael. It's so you can take a pick.
Okay, we're going to be fancy. This is Michael Maharrey.
Yes, yes, that's my scholarly name, Michael Maharrey.
PhD?
No. Two bachelors. That's the best I can give you.
Oh, well, that almost stacks up to one.
Right.
So we were talking a little bit about his podcast, Anarchy, and being an anarchist and a Christian. And we touched a little on Romans 13. And it reminded me, you had talked about this in your last episode, but it's always a hot topic for people that are Christians and anarchists, is this wave of American evangelical Christianity. So I really think that Christianity is very suitable with anarchism, obviously, and libertarian philosophy. And they really weren't that far apart for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then from what I've read historically, I think it's somewhere around the 1920s, the church started to evolve in America. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, not so much the history, but I can definitely speak to how American evangelicalism started to, what I would consider Orthodox Christianity. It became very political, both on the left and the right. And maybe the left isn't quite, what you would call evangelical, but they're evangelical in their own way, right? Mm-hmm. But it really started to stray away from the teachings of Christ and whatnot. And it started to evolve into this. We've got to form society into our vision. It's almost like we see this kingdom of God, and it's like, we're going to make that happen, but that's hard. So let's get the government to do it for us. And again, we're getting to this idea of using violence, force, and coercion, which is the exact opposite of what Jesus did when he established the kingdom. And I think it's important to really look at, Jesus as the Messiah and the expectations that folks had when he was walking the earth of what the Messiah was supposed to be. They believed that they were going to have another King David, that this mighty ruler was going to come up, and he was going to raise up an army, and he was going to overthrow the burdensome yoke of the Romans. It was very much a nationalistic, militaristic type of viewpoint. Now, of course, there were religious aspects to it. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't all about that, but that's what they viewed. David was going to come back. And we saw very early on that this wasn't the kind of Messiah that Jesus was going to be. He was talking about turning the other cheek and loving your enemies. And he was tweaking the religious institutions of the day. And it really comes to a head when he enters into Jerusalem towards the end of his life on a donkey. That symbolism is extremely important. The expectation would be that the Messiah would ride in on a white stallion. Literally. I mean, that's what generals did. And the whole triumphant entry is kind of it alludes to these great military victories, parades that they had when these rulers came back as conquering heroes. And Jesus came back, no, I'm coming in on a donkey. And instead of starting a war and, pulling his sword out with Peter, he told Peter to put the sword away. That's not the kind of kingdom we're going to have. He went to the cross and died. He submitted to all of these authorities, and he triumphed over them through dying. That's not what anybody expected, but that's hard, and it doesn't fit into the pattern of this world. And I think we've gotten as a church in the United States and probably a lot of places, but I can speak obviously to here. We've gotten to this point that we've embraced that kind of Israeli messianic view that we're going to somehow triumph over the evils of the world through our grand political efforts, and America is God's country, and the Constitution was ordained and handed down by God, and we're going to do it, and we're going to get rid of immorality, all this horrible abortion and divorce and gay people, and yet we're going to continue to gossip behind each other's back because that's not such a big deal,
or Americans eating lots of food and getting really large. That's not one of those horrible things.
No, let's not talk about that. So, I really feel like that the church, by and large, has strayed away from what the truth of the gospel is. And the gospel is about grace and mercy and peace. We call the man that we follow the Prince of Peace. And so that's why I am so adamantly anti-war now. How can you follow the Prince of Peace and revel in war? You just can't do it. It doesn't make any sense. But I think that this plays into something that is very prominent in human psychology. And of course, the devil, if you want to use the devil as a real person, or whether that's just a personification of evil, however you want to perceive that, cool. But the forces of evil use that against us. And human beings want a checklist. We are control freaks. We want to control everything. We want to control each other. We want to control our own lives. And ultimately, we would like to control God. And I think that's what religion has become. It's a way for us to control God. So we have this checklist of things. I didn't get divorced. I didn't have an abortion. I'm not gay. Therefore, God has to let me into his kingdom. Well, it doesn't work like that. And it really starts to fall apart when all of a sudden you can't check something off that checklist. And that was a huge struggle for me when I got divorced. It was like, because I had really embraced that kind of worldview. Mm-hmm. But it's not a checklist, and we can't control God. God has no obligation to do anything for us, even if we check off all the little boxes. So maybe we should quit trying to check off the boxes and instead do the things that Jesus taught us to do, to love each other, to serve one another, to bring beauty and joy into the world, as opposed to trying to force other people to bend to our will or our perception of how society should be. And that's really, to me, how the political philosophy flows into Christianity. The political philosophy is teaching that we interact voluntarily. We don't force other people to do our will. That's exactly the way Jesus tells us to interact with the world, and that's exactly the way God interacts with us. He doesn't force us to follow him. He gives us the freedom to choose yes or no. Now, as with all choices, there's consequences to those things, but he's not putting a gun to our head and saying that you must do this or that. And so therefore, I think we should extend that same grace to our fellow men and women.
Mm-hmm. And I know that when you started to realize that it wasn't about, checking boxes and being okay, that you did a short stint as an atheist.
I did. I was the world's worst atheist.
Like? I've gone like agnostic and kind of go, but I've never in my life, thought there just isn't a God. So that's a weird thought to me. I can understand why people believe that.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, it was, so the reason, and this all came about because of the aforementioned divorce. I mean, I went through a period in my life in my early 30s where a lot of things in my life flew apart. And I was involved in a church that had split, and then my marriage fell apart. And so I think in a large part, it was easier to just say that there is no God than to deal with the wreckage in my life. I could just blow it all off by saying there is no God. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to do that really probably pretty hardcore for about 3 years. And I was really bad at it because there's too much in me that knew that, maybe it's not the God that I understood, but there must be a God somewhere. So I had a really good friend who was also an atheist that I worked with. And so we would start talking about spiritual things and religion. And, the next thing you know, me, the new atheist, is arguing the Christian perspective with my friend.
Worst atheist ever.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I went through a period where I was kind of agnostic and I don't know. And then, God being God, he kind of just brought me slowly back. And my faith is very different than it was, back in my diehard evangelical Christian days. But I think it's a much healthier faith I think the biggest lesson that I had to learn was to be able to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. That's a hard thing. I'm a black and white thinker. I like things to be chop, chop, chop. I like to argue. But there's a lot of things I don't understand. And particularly when it comes to God. And even Paul, he wrote in, I think it was in one of the Corinthians, we see into a mirror dimly. We don't see all of it. Even Paul didn't see all of it. And he wrote half the New Testament. So therefore, I think it's probably okay for me to say, I don't know. I don't understand all of these things. I don't understand all of the nuances of Romans 13. I can admit that. Yeah.
And that kind of circles back to that American evangelical Christianity where we try to want it to make everything black and white.
Right.
And somehow there's no glory in, saying, I don't know something. Well, being humble, there's no glory in that. We want to be glorified right now as human beings all over the globe. We want to conflict and conquer and be on top and be the best. And it's, saying,
that's why I'm doing, sure. That's why I'm doing this interview, because I'm going to be famous, right?
Yeah, exactly. All three people listen. No.
Yes.
So faith and libertarian and anarchist philosophy, it's funny because some people use libertarianism as their faith. And I think that's a dangerous road to go down. And this doesn't have to do with people that are atheist or Christian or whatever.
Right.
It's the fact that they want it to answer all questions.
Yes.
To check every box. What is libertarianism lacking? What is the philosophy of anarchism and libertarianism?
I'm so glad that you asked that question, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Not even just about libertarianism, but about all kinds of things. I think this is another human tendency. We want this list, this dogma, to basically be our instruction sheet for everything in life. And it really doesn't work like that. And certainly libertarianism, it's a political philosophy. It tells us a lot of really good things about how we should interact with each other in a political sense. It teaches us a lot of good things about self-ownership and about permissible and unpermissible use of violence and aggression and whatnot. But just because something is permissible doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial or it's the right thing to do. I'll give you a perfect example in terms of libertarian philosophy. As a libertarian, I believe that if you own a business, it is perfectly acceptable, because it is your property, to exclude whomever you choose. So you could, let's say that you're just the kind of person that doesn't like interracial marriages, and you own a business and you see Mike and Cynthia coming up and you think, I don't want them in my store. That is within your right. That would be ethically permissible within a libertarian framework to exclude me from your private property because of whatever reason that is. It doesn't follow that is a moral and ethical position to take. Just because it's okay within the scope of libertarianism doesn't mean it's necessarily okay in a broader moral, ethical sense. I don't think you should exclude people, because that's just mean. Yeah. And so libertarian doesn't really speak to that. It allows for a lot of activities in terms of private property that aren't necessarily beneficial, and that maybe we should consider whether or not we want to follow those things. Even looking at something like prostitution, I don't think prostitution is a good thing. I don't want my daughter to be a prostitute.
Right.
This idea that you see in some circles of libertarianism where we're like supposed to glorify sex work or something like that.
Right.
I'm not comfortable with that, because I think there's a lot of problems that go along with unhealthy sexuality like that. That being said, I don't think you should lock somebody in a cage.
Yeah.
And so libertarianism does inform us of how we should deal with this as a society. It doesn't necessarily tell us how we should deal with it on an individual basis. So you need more. You need libertarian and something. So for me, libertarian and Christianity, we need something else. Now, I see the same problem sometimes in Christianity where people want to make the Bible be the answer to every question. And they're looking at Genesis to try to explain, how creation happened. I don't think Genesis was meant to be a science book.
No.
And so, we need to be broad thinkers. God gave us brains to think, And there's a lot of things that we can look into to understand the way the world works and the way that we should interact with the world and those people around us. And my faith is certainly the biggest thing that informs that, but my political philosophy informs that. My own taste and preferences inform that. My culture and background and family, all of those things play into it. And I think we're in a dangerous place when we try to make any one thing, especially a political philosophy, be the entire thing that we center our lives on. And I get frustrated with the libertarian. We were joking about the sports balls earlier, but there's some people that, like, if you post something about, oh, that was a great game, you'll get some neckbeard will show up. Oh, you're doing the sports ball. Why aren't you doing something important? I mean, my life doesn't all center on politics.
Yeah.
I like people to go play hockey. I know. And you know what? That's fine. If that's your hobby, more power to you. But who are you to criticize me for wanting to watch sports? I don't get video games. I was just a little too old for the whole video. I had the Atari. I did the Space Invaders and then the Pong thing where bloop, bloop. But I just never got into video. I can't imagine why anybody would want to spend time playing video games. I'm not going to go on Facebook and somebody's talking about their video. What are you doing playing video games?
Yeah.
It's just
I've gotten that with certain things. And some people, we call them neckbeards. If you guys aren't familiar with it, right. Go on social media and at a libertarian page and you'll know.
Yes, you will find them or they will find you.
And if you're female, they'll friend you really fast.
Yeah, they will.
But so many people have this is the specific answer to this or that, and you can't like this, and it's like, you do know that two things can be true at the same time, and I can do more than one thing in my life.
Yeah,
it's like, why are you worried about this celebrity or whatever when war is going on? Yeah, I think it's good to have perspective. I definitely do. But
sure.
what? Sometimes I just like stuff that's funny and entertaining because why would I want to be alive if I was just depressed the whole time?
Exactly.
And I knew I couldn't end it,
we pursue liberty because we want to live free, because we believe that will make a better life for us. That's what it's really about. It's about making, it's about prospering and having.
And for generations to come. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So what's the point of having liberty and freedom if you don't do anything to enjoy your life? And that brings me, you brought up another point that's been stuck in my craw since we're having Mike on his soapbox airing his grievances day. This idea that when it comes to how we approach our libertarian work, that there's one way to do it. Mm-hmm. I am so sick and tired of watching libertarians bitch at each other because they don't think that they're doing it right. You're not doing libertarianism right. So you've got people who want to throw rocks at the LP because they don't like what the LP is doing, or people will throw rocks at the 10th Amendment Center because, oh, you're doing that Constitution, you stupid statist. How can you get liberty like that? Or, somebody going after the agorists because, well, you need to get involved in politics, or politics will get involved with you. Why do we have to pick one thing and not be the only thing? Why can't the LP do its thing and the 10th Amendment Center do its thing and the agorists do their thing and podcasters do their things? There's a lot of liberty to be won. I think maybe we could not waste so much time fighting with each other. It's like we've got 30 people and we're going to divide up into 28 groups and fight each other. It's dumb.
Yeah.
And it's
like we're this little army in a circle, and the world is coming to attack us. So we turn inward and kill the 20 soldiers in there.
And then along those lines, somebody will hear something that I say that they disagree with, which is cool. I would be disturbed if you agree with everything that Mike Maharrey thinks and says.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that now.
Yeah. But just because I say one thing that you might disagree with, even if you disagree with it vehemently, don't throw out everything that Mike Maharrey is because you disagree with that one thing. And I see this happening in libertarian movements as well. You'll mention so-and-so, I don't want to pick a name, but just, Joe Blow Libertarian. I really like Joe Blow Libertarian. Well, did you hear what Joe Blow Libertarian said about IP? I hate him. He said everything else you might agree with, but this one thing I can't. It's like the libertarian purity test, and this
Or
stuff drives me
they'll
crazy.
take a hero and they'll form their philosophy off of every little version of libertarianism, anarchist, and that person. And then if anybody disagrees with that, well, that's what the hero says. And it's like, well, I have a lot of people I really look up to that I would maybe consider heroes because they're really compassionate, kind, whatever. Sure. I don't. There's plenty of times where I'm like, yeah, that was wrong, but that's okay. I still really appreciate that person,
Right. I mean, like I'll give you an example. I love Walter Block. Walter Block is a great economist. I disagree with his position on abortion. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to, I can't listen to anything Walter Block says because he's got this one position that I don't like. Why do people think like that? I mean, I've posted quotes before by saying like Martin Luther King. Well, he was a socialist, don't you?
No, okay. Really?
Okay. Does that negate the truth in quote? Well, no, but still, he was a socialist. Okay, whatever. It's
I get that with some anarcho-communists that I think have some really good points to make and are brilliant people. Yeah. And it's like, but too bad they were a filthy commie. It's like, too bad you completely missed the point.
Right, exactly. There's truth to be found in so many places, and none of us have a monopoly on the truth. None of us have a monopoly on the best strategy to use. I certainly have opinions, especially when it comes to political strategy. But if somebody chooses to do something different, I'm not going to waste my time hating them, especially if our goal is the same, doing away with the state. There's so much work to be done, and there's a place for the agorists and the anarchists and the minarchists and the constitutionalists and the Lockeans and even the anarcho-communists. I mean, if we can agree with them and work with them in certain areas, why not?
Yeah.
Where our goals coincide, let's work together. I love working with people on the far left when it comes to surveillance because they're really good on that stuff. Mm-hmm. I can't get right-wingers to work on it because they're out there, if you're not doing anything wrong, you got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
All right, whatever.
Like, that always leads down a good path. That's always worked out in history, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, so that's my soapbox. I appreciate you letting me get all that off my chest now. Now people will be like, hey, Mike Maharrey, he believes everybody.
I do think, and I completely agree with that. In fact, I'm in a chat with some fellow co-hosts, and I think that's part of what I like about our network is we have people from conservatarians to left libertarians to anarchists or whatever, and we can all get disagree on things, but it's like at the end of the day, you should be an adult and say, okay, I'm going to agree to disagree, but thanks for letting me listen to it. You never know when you talk to somebody down the road, if you were kind before, that idea is going to stick in their head too.
Yeah.
So. And
I think it's a healthy thing to learn to have relationships and be friends with people that have vastly different worldviews. I hate to go back to sports balls again, but I'm going to.
No, you don't. You don't hate that at all.
No, I don't hate it at all. I love it. I work sports into anything that I can. But a locker room is a fascinating place. And I actually wrote a little article back, and this has been more than a decade ago. I played hockey at the University of South Florida on the club hockey team. And, at the time I was 40. So most of the other guys on the team were in their teens and 20s. So there's a vast age difference. But you had all of these different people from different countries, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races. But we were all on this team together. We all got to know each other. We all became friends because we had this common goal together to win hockey games. Mm-hmm. And it's a healthy thing to be able to say, I don't agree with your politics, but we can still be friends. We can still hang out. We can still have fun. We can still do things together. We can still, win a hockey game or make the world a better place, even if we disagree on these other things. And I think we need more of that in the world and less trying to fit ourselves into these little silos where nobody's different from each other. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to sound like a commie leftist.
Yeah, look at you.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be change the show name to Comarchy. No. So what you were saying, basically, I'm going to kind of tie this back in to faith and anarchy, libertarianism, is that, different people in the liberty movement have different skill sets. And that is actually quite echoed in scripture, because we all have spiritual gifts.
Yes.
And so if everybody was a preacher, or everybody was a musician, or everybody was a writer, although sometimes everybody thinks they're a writer because of social media.
Right. I've edited their stuff. They're not.
Yeah, I know. Whenever I write something, I basically am like, give it to somebody, and they don't really edit it. They are just like, well, that was a neat idea. Let me just write a new one.
Let me rewrite this for you.
I will freely admit that's one of my strengths. Nothing longer than, a few paragraphs. But so I think that there's natural truth in libertarianism, but it is not ultimate truth.
Right.
So I know that you kind of started your journey, and it shaped your faith a little bit, changing your political beliefs. And that kind of did for me, but it's not because libertarianism or anarchism is my religion or my God. I just think that it's got a lot of truth in it, and God is truth. So you can find that in a lot of places. Yeah.
And truth transcends all of we have all of these different areas of thinking. We have philosophy, and we have science, and we have biology. I guess that's part of science. And we have mathematics, and we have history. We have all of these different things. Threads of truth run through all of those things and weave them together. And those different aspects reveal different parts of the ultimate fabric of truth. So you learn things from biology or chemistry. You learn things from philosophy. You learn things from your religious background and faith. And all of those things weave together this tapestry of truth. It's kind of like the old analogy of the elephant. You're feeling the elephant through the fence. And if you reach through and you grab a tusk, you're going to have a vastly different understanding of the elephant than if you reach out and grab its tail. But it's still the same elephant. And so we need all of the perspectives. We need science. We need religion. We need politics. We need philosophy. We need mathematics. We need whatever things I'm leaving out to help us to understand the totality of truth. We definitely need lots of or sports pups, which are really better than sports balls.
My husband is an ultra runner, so I call his thing sports legs.
Yeah,
going to do your sports legs, honey? Sports legs.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, and your example of the church, it's perfect. It's the where Paul talks about in again one of the Corinthians about the hand isn't a foot. We need a hand and a foot. The same thing is true in our libertarian world. We need all of these different people doing all of these different things. And sometimes they may even seem contradictory. If you have somebody that is spiritually gifted in prophecy, which is kind of like preaching, telling the truth, and you have somebody else whose spiritual gift is mercy, they're going to have a very different approach to the homeless guy that walks into the church. Your guy that's oriented towards prophecy is going to be trying to preach to him and say, you need to get your life straightened out and do this and do this. And the person who has mercy is going to be back in the kitchen, fixing him a meal. You need both, because they do need to get their life straightened out, but they also need a meal. So we do need all of these different parts and pieces, and maybe we do better to recognize the importance of our diversity instead of trying to shove everybody into whatever pathway that we think is best or that we're equipped for.
And then another part of that too, I think where faith and libertarianism kind of intertwine or whatever would be leading by example. So the best way to get somebody to stop advocating for violence is to show them, I'm not a violent person, and it's working pretty well for me. The same way with Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. I can, it goes back to the analogy I used with my wife. If I can show you my relationship with my wife and you can see who she is, you're going to get far more understanding than if I, stand back here and tell you about how awesome my wife is. My wife is very awesome, by the way.
She is, and she's really funny too, by the way. Yes, I can vouch for that too.
Yes, she definitely is. always a hoot at the Maharrey household, but yeah, you're definitely right about that. It's something that we need to live. It's not just a philosophy; it's a lifestyle that we live. We want to live free. We want to live peacefully. We want to live in a way that promotes human flourishing. I love that term, human flourishing. I can't remember where I first saw that, but that's what we're looking for, right? What is the best way to accomplish human flourishing? I would suggest that hitting each other is not the best way to accomplish human flourishing.
I quite agree. In fact, I think I ran, something shut up in my Facebook memories yesterday. And it was something, I quoted you on something. Hitting people is not, something about adult interaction. I can't remember what you said. And I'm trying to get you to remember something from my Facebook memory.
I have no idea.
But I think I tagged you. So anyways, it was a good quote. Hey, if you don't follow Mike on Facebook or wherever, go there. So where else can people find you?
All right. So we've talked about Godarchy. You can go to godarchy.org and just check out the website. You can actually you can sign up there, and anytime I do a post or release a podcast, it'll pop up. And then if you go there, you'll also find all of the various places that the podcast is available, which is like your typical iTunes, Stitcher, Google, YouTube, Spotify, all that stuff. All that links, you'll find all of that at godarchy.org. You can follow me on Twitter at mmaharrey10th. So it's like the number 10th. I'm not a very good Twitterer, but every once in a while, I get on a roll. My best Twitter game is actually retweeting all of the awesome tweets that Michael Bolden puts out. So.
Yeah, he's pretty good at he's pretty good at the Twitters.
Yeah, he's very pithy on the Twitters.
Yeah.
So I'm there. I am on Facebook. If you friend request me, I'll most likely accept your friend request unless you look crazy. Wait, and I have a pretty big leeway. I tend to friend everybody and then block them. Like the people when you friend them and like within 45 seconds they're instant messaging you. That'll get you blocked really fast.
Yeah, I know. I get those.
Yeah. But
it's funny when I don't know if I friend requested you or not. We had some mutual friends and we were in a group of libertarians, and you had a hockey mask. But honestly, I didn't know that you liked hockey. And I thought, is this guy trying to be edgy? Like, I thought it was like a Jason mask.
Right. That's funny. Yeah,
and I'm
probably.
like, gosh, his name sounds familiar. And I think I was listening to Tom Woods. I'm like, oh, that's the guy. That makes more sense.
Yeah. That's probably, I think I know exactly what that picture was too. I think it's probably the one with the stitches on it.
Yeah, it's pretty edgy.
It's like a famous, it was a famous goalie mask. So yeah, I'm on the Facebook. You can check out my own personal website, which is michaelmaharrey.com. If you're interested in Constitution stuff, that's more oriented towards that. You can find my books. You mentioned Constitution Owner's Manual. I also have another book called Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty, which is about nullification, which is another statisty thing, but very
it's
effective.
Excellent. Decentralized.
Decentralization. Yeah. So that's at my website. I also have music over there if you're interested in hearing my hacking at keyboards and saxophone. That stuff's all on my website. And then of course, if you're interested in the economics and the finance stuff, shiftgold.com/news, pretty much everything that's there I've written. So
awesome. Boy, you really do actually have a large scope of liberty. You were talking about finding your niche. You got a bunch.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty and curse of being trained in journalism. I'm really good at distilling and articulating other people's ideas. So,
makes you a good editor too. So I'm going to send you some stuff over.
So if you want to know what Michael Bolden, Peter Schiff, if you want to know what those people think, and not have to wade through all of this stuff that they say, you can just come to me and I'll give you the condensed version.
You heard it here first, folks. All right. Well, we did talk about Christianity and faith, and I contemplated whether I was going to close out the show the way I normally do, but honestly, I'm going to say it anyway.
It's got to be done. It's got to be said.
I wish you peace, grace, and love, and fuck the state.
Amen.